Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Maurizio Benazzo.
My name is Zaya Benazzo. Welcome, everyone.
Welcome,
We are
welcome.
speaking from the territory of coastal Miwok and southern Como, also known Sebastopol today. And yeah, we're okay.
We're a little flustered.
No.
Yeah.
I just want to begin with a brief introduction, just where we are to situate us, what's the context in which this meeting is happening. And these are heartbreaking times and also gut-wrenching times as we are all witnessing and watching at this very moment over 1.4 million Palestinians, 600,000 of them children, are seeking shelter, and they're fleeing Rafah at this very moment as Israeli airstrikes and shelling hammer the eastern part of the city. Fuel, food, medicine, and other supplies have been completely cut off with the closure of the border crossing with Egypt, and the main hospital in the area is shut down. The situation is bleak. At the same time, we are also seeing the glimpses of hope as we're watching the rising of a global student movement that is growing each day. And young people and now also their faculty have been are really embodying through courage and commitment, unwavering commitment to truth in justice that gives hope in my heart, at least.
Yeah.
And today we have invited a very special guest with us, Rabbi Lynn Gottlieb.
And I want to read a brief bio just to introduce Rabbi Lynn in case you don't know her. And is Rabbi Lynn Gottlieb, one of the first women rabbis in Jewish history, is a pioneering feminist, human rights activist, writer, artist, and community educator. She has been a congregational rabbi since 1973 and founded Congregational Nahalat Shalom in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Rabbi Lynn engages in multi-faith, intergenerational, and multicultural organizing in solidarity with racial, indigenous, gender justice, and Palestinian liberation struggles. She serves on the Rabbinic Council of Jewish Voice for Peace and is a board chair of Interfaith Movement for Human Integrity. Rabbi Lynn is the author of several books and is a practitioner of the Torah of nonviolence. Thank you. It's such a joy and an honor to have you in our community.
And just as a brief, the way we're going to hold the meeting is we'll have Rabbi Lynn share a poem and perhaps a prayer with us. We'll have a conversation with her and then open for your questions. And the way you're going to ask your question is, please type your question in the chat first. Raise your hand in the Q&A, and then we call you by name and you can come on screen. Some of the questions we will just read. We invite you to practice with kindness, with calm. I know it's a very charged times, charged territory. It brings a lot in our hearts. So let's try to be kind and bring questions that really help us learn and grow and be together. We don't need more fragmentation and divisiveness if possible. So let's practice, if possible, kindness and listening. Welcome, Rabbi Lynn.
Thank you.
To have you here today.
Thank you so much. It's good to be here and to be engaged in this overwhelming moment for Palestinians and for many people whose hearts are broken over what we're witnessing. I wanted to begin with a song. Sometimes we think of prayers as grounding us, taking a breath, feeling our feet on the ground, experiencing where we're sitting, drinking water, and praying for what we hope, or giving thanks for what we have. Some prayers are also lamentations. They spring from the midst of genocide. And these are the prayers and words and liturgies that I would like to bring forward today. The first is called Sibrent. It's a Yiddish poem that was sung during the Holocaust. And it speaks to the desperation that people feel when such violence is unleashed upon them. It's burning, siblings. It's burning. Our poor country is burning. Raging winds are fanning the wild flames and furiously tearing, destroying and scattering everything all around. All is burning. And you stand and you look just so, you with folded hands while our entire country is burning, and debate what to call this catastrophe. It's burning, siblings. It's burning. Our poor country is burning. The moment is at hand when, God forbid, our homes, along with all of us, are turned to ashes by the flames, and only bare black walls and rubble remain. Our town is burning. Only you can save it. Extinguish the fire with your very blood if you must. Don't just stand there, siblings, with folded hands. Don't just stand there. Put out the fire. This is Sibrent, and when I read it and sing it, it's a haunting melody. I am very aware of how much it sounds like the song that we just heard and the poetry that is coming to us from Gaza. And I would like to read a poem by a martyred poet, Palestinian poet, Hin Jude, partly because genocide means the destruction of so much culture that has taken millennia to create. And Hin says, this is a brief part of her poem, what does it mean to be a poet in wartime? It means that you apologize. You apologize excessively to the burned out trees, to the birds without nests, to the flattened houses, to the long cracks in the road's midsection, and to the children, pallid in death. And behind me, because I come to the world as an artist, storyteller, poet, ceremonialist, and all of those, and painter, sometimes words just fail me. And so I paint. And the image that you see behind me says, all eyes on Rafah. At the bottom of the frame are poppy seeds, symbol of Palestinian resilience. And the figure is a woman crying. I'm spent a lot of my life in New Mexico. And if you know New Mexican iconography, you would see the inspiration and the figures that she is crying over are the tens of thousands of wrapped bodies with names or no names upon them that have become the ground of Gaza. And so I extend my deepest condolences to everyone who has experienced the loss of life. Some people who have lost entire families. And I would like to address today concepts of root cause, what solidarity looks like, what trauma is in this moment, and how we might contribute to ceasefire and the end of the militarism that is, and colonialism and imperialism that has made a mess of millions of lives in the last 500 years. And I believe I can take questions if that is the process.
Yeah.
I just also want to say that I recently returned from, I've been going to encampments, many encampments, because I'm a person that likes to be on the ground and see what's happening. I've been to Palestine and Israel, specifically leading delegations to Palestine many times, over 20 times. And I studied high school in Israel in 1966 at Leo Beck High School. I went to college at the Hebrew University. I still am able to carry on conversations in Hebrew, obviously read Hebrew. And my Arabic is a shwaya becha shwaya, just a little bit. But I just want to share that for me, speaking of these things comes from putting myself in the midst of what is happening. And therefore, I was called to go to the encampments and am being called to go to encampments and have visited 4 encampments so far and have found several common threads, which I can share at some point about what solidarity might look like in terms of painting a picture of the world that we hope we can bring into being.
Thank you, Rabbi Lynn. And I mean, you are one of the longtime advocates for Palestinian rights. And I wonder if you can reflect, what was the beginning for you? Were you born in the family that knowledge, that awareness was already there, or you had your own awakening? And with that question, I would just add, like, you must have seen so much over 50 years, perhaps, of your work. What feels special about this very moment? If it feels more special than any other time.
I was born in 1949 and I grew up in Allentown, Pennsylvania. I am Miriam, the daughter of Tzivia, the daughter of Bessie, the daughter of Delia, the daughter of Jenny, the daughter of Henrietta, who came to Turtle Island, the United States, in 1839, and from the German Jewish immigration at that time, and founded one of the first 10 synagogues in the United States called Covenant of Peace. My mother was a puppeteer and theater person, And I grew up on stories which allowed me to experiment with many perspectives. That's a kind of wonderful thing, that you get to hear many stories from many different places and listen to how people tell stories. And as a storyteller, certain common threads arise. I was sent to Israel in 1966 as an exchange student by the Reform Movement. And that was the second year of what was called Eisendrath International Exchange. And I spent the summer in Upper Nazareth. First came to Jerusalem, spent the summer in Upper Nazareth, and then studied in Haifa. For me, growing up with rabbis in the United States, Reform rabbis who were very active in the civil rights movement and brought that concern into the congregation. And already in 8th grade, I had created my first experimental liturgy. He was speaking about the civil rights movement. This was choreographed. And I had written a creative service that started with the people I roped into it, other 8th graders, to stand up in all four corners of the synagogue and say, but what can we do? That was really my entrance into activism. What can we do? And that was in the 8th grade. And they were teaching, their message at the time was never again means never again for anyone. They taught us, and that was really at the time the message that came out of the Holocaust by Holocaust survivors who, for instance, helped write the Convention on Genocide, which is important to know about and to study, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, added a kind of universalist approach to thinking about human rights, that we should protect the special cultures and life of all communities, and no one should be subject to harm based on identity. So I had that in me, all of these things. So when I went to Israel, I went as a young Zionist. I didn't really call myself that. I didn't know that's what it was, but I was carrying the narrative of the state of Israel, the early narrative of the state of Israel, which was there was a land without a people. We were coming back after 2,000 years. All the Arabs were against us. And this was a great opportunity for us to come back to our homeland. It didn't even, and the first tour guide was Zev Vilnai, and for those of you probably wouldn't hear him, but he was known of him, but he is considered the father of Israeli tourism. You can find links to him online. It's a fascinating colonial history. Indigenous populations, people already living there, were thought of as kind of primitive and disposable. And this is before 1948. When I came in 66, not that long after, we were getting the history by Zev Vilnai as we were driving up the hill to Jerusalem of the biblical stories and events on the right, and stories about the War of Independence on the left, and including the very famous Syrian tanks that are still monuments on the side of the road to teach that story. And we were driving by a city full of lights, and I clearly expected Zev Vilnai to say something about the city since he was narrating everything everywhere, but he said nothing. And so I asked him, who lives there? And he said, Arabs live there. That was his terminology. And I said, what? This is how uninformed I was as a young person being sent there with a whole ideological package in my possession. But I said, well, I thought you said this was a land without a people. And he said, well, Arabs used to live here, but they all left. I just, what is that about? What? And I tried to track that down. I was precocious. I've always been that way. And at 17, I was still precocious. And so no one really would give me an answer that felt honest, actually, or made sense to me. So I sought out a Palestinian voice. I got on an Egged bus. I had heard about, I went with a young person I was living with, Shula, who lived in Upper Nazareth. We we're not able to communicate to each other very easily because my Hebrew then was extremely limited, as was her English. But we got on this bus and we went down the hill to Nazareth because she said she knew an Arab. And so we actually landed on his door, knocked on the door, were invited in, given tea and oranges. He wasn't home yet. And I was wearing a kova tembel, which is literally a fool's hat. This is the pioneer hat. It's a bucket hat. I had that on my head. And I had short shorts and a short sleeve shirt. I mean, if anybody looked like they were wearing a fool's hat, it was me. And so when Atala came home, he was a little perturbed, what was I doing in his house? And I pulled out a yellow tablet. I was prepared actually to interview him. And I had been given an assignment by the Allentown paper, the Journal, to write an article for the teen section. So I was prepared. And I asked him, told him why I was there. And I asked him what it was like to be an Arab Israeli. He looked at me, and he said something which changed it changed my understanding completely. He said, first of all, I will let you interview me, but on one condition. What I'm about to tell you will disturb your world. And you will become accountable for this story, once you hear this story,
Yes,
you have to be accountable. Do you agree to be accountable to this story? And I had my hand holding the pen, and I felt like I was about to sign a contract to a new covenant. And he told me the story of the Nakba.
Mm.
And it was shocking. And this moment, I think, is like that for a lot of people who, I heard it in 1966, but a lot of people in this moment are kind of just hearing about what happened. And it has become taken center stage for many reasons, which I can talk about. In that moment, it felt like the tablets, the Zionist tablets, if you like, had been thrown to the ground and had been shattered. And I started picking up the shards. This is the image that is given when we tell the story of Jewish people receiving the Torah at Mount Sinai the first time around. They make a golden calf while Moses is still on the mountain, this story goes. And so Moses throws the tablets down, and after they receive the tablets a second time, they gather up all the shards and they put those in the ark as well. So what is broken and what is whole are both in the ark. And for me, I have been working on understanding, trying to gain understanding that for me, the operationalizing love means the establishment of equity. That's what I learned from my Torah. That's it. To operationalize love, you need equity. You need no harm. And to me, this is the Torah. This is what all religions are about. This is how we come together. We want to reduce harm. And in order to do that, we have to understand what is causing the harm. And so it's been 56 years, longer than I've been a rabbi, following this path.
Wow.
Wow. It feels very symbolic, your first awakening. It's true. It feels like that's collectively is happening today. If we can touch on trauma, so how do you understand the intergenerational trauma that is behind the genocide we're seeing today? How can people who have experienced genocide impose genocide today? What is the existential fear behind this, all of this?
Violence, extreme violence, has a profound impact on people and makes them vulnerable to fear and to not making the best choices about how to keep each other safe. I have worked with survivors of Holocaust a lot. And that also taught me something very interesting, because the survivors that I've worked with over a long period of time were often reduced to their trauma and were kind of trotted out on Yom HaShoah without even necessarily mentioning the names of their families who died. And I came to realize that when Holocaust survivors kept asking me to lead services for them, which surprised a lot of people, but it's because I mentioned the names of their families. And also I emphasize, my congregation in Albuquerque, New Mexico, we learned klezmer music. We chose klezmer music and Yiddish poetry, also Middle Eastern music, Sephardic music. We really invested in all of the cultural expressions of the diversity of Jewish people, because there is a very diverse community of Jews. And repair, the survivors love that because it gave them a sense of what happened before the trauma, before the Holocaust. Like their lives weren't just completely thrown away and the past covered over, and now they had to be the new Jew without any connection. And we see that that's a kind of denial of the larger community, to see the whole, not to just focus on their trauma and to use it for a political purpose, which it has been used. It has been weaponized by political forces who don't really care about survivors even, for completely different reasons. So yes, people who are traumatized are subject to experiencing harm, flashbacks, all kinds of things. The state policy of putting up walls and erasing an entire other people does not heal that trauma. These things are not related. And human rights still exists. Nothing, this amount of harm is not justified because of trauma. It only increases trauma. And as someone because I'm one of the first women rabbis, a lot of people came to me who did not find any comfort or any treatment in the institutional Jewish community survivors of sexual abuse, domestic violence, survivors of torture, moral injury that impacts soldiers, victims of horrific state and social violence around the world. And so listening to those voices, that large pool of voices, and the many different methodologies of healing trauma is a really important question. But for me, it is not related to understanding or to justifying, I should say, to justifying the complete erasure and 75-year persecution of an entire people who are also indigenous to the region. It's like, we know in Turtle Island, for those of us who have any idea of indigenous history, I do, and I've been very active. I lived in New Mexico. I was involved there in a lot of different things. There are more than one tribe in a place. And that's always been true everywhere, So the kind of nationalism reduces our diversity. And
establishing a state was never part of their values.
Yes.
Never.
Ownership of land, establishing a state.
It's a colonial
concept.
invention.
Yes, that's a different kind of project and I like to remind people, if you ever care to read Balfour's words, he was, the establishment of the state of Israel was profoundly anti-Semitic. And this support by white supremacists that we see now and is profoundly anti-Semitic. It's this idea that Jewish people can't actually find safety where you live. So you have to have a state of your own in order to actually feel safe.
And the UK and the US didn't want the Jews, in their own territories. So
exactly,
it was convenient to send them somewhere else.
And Balfour, when he says that he's approving to give the land to the Zionists, and 2 lines below, he says, as long as they respect the indigenous population and they don't harm them in any way. We have it.
That was that part.
The part was nobody reads it, right? You conveniently, it's just exactly 2 lines below.
No, the Balfour is the
not that is a standard of
authority.
Anyway,
But
and at the time, for instance, reading someone like Rabbi Tamaris, who died in 1931, who was a pacifist rabbi, was an early observer of the Zionist movement, and he, like many rabbis at the time, didn't have kind words for the Jewish Balfourists, which they were originally called, because they were relying on militarism and violence as a solution toward establishing communities of civil peace. He didn't believe in that. He didn't believe that Jewish tradition believed in that.
No, talking about identity. So the concept of Israel is based on the idea of a promised land, idea or the myth or the teachings. I'm not sure which word to use, but it's central to the Zionist indoctrination. At this time, do you see the need to dismantle or reinterpret this story, this myth about the promised land, and to reconcile biblical narrative with the imperative to create a Judaism that is universal, that is inclusive, and it's committed to justice for all people?
There are conflicting narratives, no doubt, within every tradition.
Yeah.
And so we have to choose what threads we want to pull on for what purposes we're pulling on them. the promised land is a viable concept for Jewish people who have a longing to live in Israel. Because Israel is part of the Jewish diaspora, the love of the land and the traditions and the culture doesn't have to be erased to live there. What has to be challenged is the state apparatus that produced apartheid, occupation, and genocide. And it is hard to hold everything. Our promise can't come at the expense of an entire people. And diaspora is a viable concept within Jewish life and always has been. And truth is, majority of Jewish people throughout our history have found ways to live where they end up. And, you know, it hasn't been an easy go for humanity. We're not the only ones that have been kicked out of places, that have experienced war. And I think we have to strive together to make a promised earth, like to enlarge our concept, like wherever we live, we have to see the promised land as embracing the entire earth and in a way that doesn't erase and hurt people. People are not disposable. Palestinians are regarded as disposable. That is why there is this uprising, because people, like in the encampments are young people, they're international students, they're BIPOC student-led, students of color. There's lots and lots of Jewish students there. It's multi-faith, multiracial. There's libraries, mutual care. These encampments represent a kind of vision of where we can go, where everybody can inhabit the same spaces by talking to each other and working together. You can see it happening. So when we look at Israel, we have to remember there's no justification for evil acts. What is needed right now is another question. What tactics should we be employing? What tactics have worked? What tactics don't work? That's an important question. And the other piece that people struggle with, I know, is feeling isolated with families. I spoke to a young woman at one of the encampments I visited, whose dad is suing the local school district over people who want to teach Palestine. So in families, you have a generational pull, and unfortunately, people who really don't have a lot of experience in a intersectional and on the ground experiences have been living in a culture of denialism. Denialism is recognizable by it's all their fault, or we tried, but they don't want to cooperate. You know, it's all the blame is on them. That's denialism. We want to help, but there's nothing we can do about it. That's a different form of denialism. We let us, the privileged, figure out what to do and we'll get back to you. That's the liberal version of what's happening. Solidarity is where we want to go. That's a much more humble position because it centers people who are being directly harmed systemically. It's not that people don't experience the harm. Of course they did. 1,200 people were killed, murdered on October 7th. And if one sort of wakes up to that without understanding the full context, solidarity is very difficult. It's almost impossible. People then fall back, and maybe this is the trauma response. You just fall back on isolation and hitting back, which is part of our movie culture, our entertainment culture. It's part of the narrative of Zionism. Like, this is the only choice you have. And we do see brave efforts, for instance, in Haifa, of a group of Jewish and Palestinians called Standing Together, who elected a Palestinian excuse me, I have to sneeze. It's springtime. Excuse me.
Bless you.
Elected a Palestinian to be city council president. And they've been on speaking tours and talking about their experience inside what some people call, for convenience, 1948. But we have to understand that that is not the solution to the structural violence, because there are many contexts for Palestinian identity, and most of them are in the context of apartheid. So when you have apartheid, and I'm not just making this up, or the word genocide, these are things, that academics, researchers on the ground, field workers by the thousands have documented ad infinitum. I mean, there's so many pages of documentation.
Even if you spend one day,
yes, one day
in one day, so
became clear. It's not, you don't
one
need
day.
books, you see it.
You
feel it, you experience it.
Yes, and when I travel with people of color, which it's a very different experience. I used to travel with people of color mural makers to Palestine throughout both the territories and Israel. It's a completely different recognition than when I travel, for instance, with older white Christian people.
Yeah.
There's a privilege gap, there's a wealth gap, there's a class gap, there's a grief gap. There's just a lot to overcome. And so when you are trying to bring things together, if you don't recognize those disparities in access to human rights, it's very difficult to change what's happening. You have to address the structural issues. That's why we had Title IX, for instance, for women in sports. I mean, so many things. It's a struggle in this world, unfortunately, to create conditions where everyone can thrive. And that is the goal. So when people say from the river to the sea, which I saw written in Hebrew in the last encampment I went, in big letters next to the Arabic, so because in that environment, in the encampment environment, like the Mishkan, like the Wilderness Tabernacle, with the mixed multitudes, everybody coming together, this means one law for everybody.
Wow.
There must be equity and human rights. That's what it means.
That's simple.
Yeah.
It's
not about expelling anybody.
Yeah.
That's the misinterpretation.
Yeah.
Right.
Canceling.
Yeah. Which bring also this really disturbing is this conflation between anti-Semitism,
real anti-Semitism,
yes, versus the critique of Israel. Is one of the most, to me personally, one of the most disturbing.
How do you navigate
that?
How do you advise people to navigate, because many of us, that's what we hear all the time. When we just say the word Palestine, it means we're anti-Semite.
That is a very extreme form of denialism. Well, first, let's just start there. Understanding the spectrum of denialism is people will put up a wall, try to find a wall to put up literally and figuratively in a conversation that prevents someone from moving forward.
Beautiful. Yes.
People, including Jewish people, obviously have been saying, what is anti-Semitism? What isn't it? And lumping all Jewish people together, saying that we control the world, that that we're the puppeteers behind the curtain. All of these things are anti-Semitic, being characterized in certain ways. Anything that diminishes Jewish humanity and the diversity of Jewish humanity and the spectrum of beliefs and practices in Jewish life is kind of a racist point of view. But let's talk about Islamophobia. And we could say that anti-Semitism could apply to people who denigrate Palestinians because they're also Semites. Right. And so anti-Palestinianism is real. If we don't think it's real, we can count the number of people who are dead, which we can't, because at least twice as many, perhaps I've heard people on the ground, doctors on the ground who have gone on medical missions, estimate it's at least 5 times the number that is currently cited. So 100,000 people. That is such a problem. So when one has someone who is just profoundly in denialism, then there's always possibility of a one-on-one conversation if one has the time and energy to do that, to see if there's somewhere in there a bridge, an invitation, something that is said, one thing that is said that one might be able to find a way of making a connection or offering different information. A lot of times these conversations get into what I call confirmation bias, like the more you argue, the more people feel entrenched. So lots of times I will just reflect back what people are saying, just to let them know I hear you, I hear what you're saying, and see if there's one thing in this that I can move someone, or there's possibility of helping someone move from an absolute denialism to maybe a little crack, that there's possibly a different way of looking at this. But in my own work, I mostly work with people who are trying to be in a solidarity modality, because those are the people who are going to have an impact on a change of policy. Right now, our tax money is paying for all of this. I mean, 3 atomic bombs have been dropped on, the equivalent of 3 atomic bombs have been dropped on Palestine. I've been in Hiroshima. I know Japanese survivors. I went to Japanese remembrance. This is another part of the thing of the world story that's important to me, to understand and to listen to. And I have witnessed on the ground the devastation for decades. So someone says it's anti-Semitic when you critique Israel. I'm like, well, if it becomes anti-Semitic to save a life, what have we become? We're doing this to save a life, to save lives. to save lives, everybody's life. And right now, the people who are dying in the most horrific way with no end in sight are Palestinian children. Their lives are not disposable to me. Yeah, I mean, I yeah.
Yeah.
I feel I feel sad for my community, the community members, especially people who aren't living there, but who are sort of carrying on over here. In ways like suing a school district because some Palestinian kids want to tell stories about what's happening to them. That is beyond the pale, as it were. And as for Israelis, I'm very close to a lot of Israelis, and obviously they tend to be lefties. What can I say? And organizers of Zochrot, people who work on divestment, the Women's Peace Camp, they're bereft, completely bereft. And I cannot tell you how many people have left because it's just too much, and how many Israeli soldiers have trauma from moral injury. But that does not compare to what is happening to Palestinians and what has been happening to Palestinians for 75 years.
It's
and before, yeah.
From trauma perspective, is unfathomable to think the implications of what's happening right now.
For generation and generation and generation.
We are going to need all our creativity to let seeds grow again, but we have to be aware of what has been lost, and it is already overwhelming the amount of culture, history, wisdom, and people that are buried under the rubble of U.S. weapons. It's horrible. Yeah. Even building children playgrounds. I mean, at the very least, you would think that it wouldn't be anti-Semitic to build a playground. and I know so many groups of people, sometimes even Jewish Palestinians, who are trying to build playgrounds, pathetic playgrounds sometimes, and even those are bombed and destroyed by the army in both the West Bank and in
piece of plastic grass,
fake grass
in front of a
school.
School. The military go to remove the piece of grass.
Yeah,
that's
not even a school. It's just
anything.
A container that is used as a school. They try to put some fake grass outside so that children can sit outside.
Yeah.
The military camps, no, it's illegal. Boom, and bulldozer it. We saw it.
Yeah.
It's not like a myth.
Maybe just one last question, and then we open to the community.
Yes.
In such with so much suffering and so much despair, what gives you hope? What carries you forward? And what are the values, perhaps? What are the in your faith that help you do what you do and face, I'm sure, the incredible amount of vicious attacks that you face in your...
The encampments are an example, as was the Gaza Interfaith ceasefire pilgrimage that some of us organized, and that brought 2,000 people in the street, faith-based people in the street, 2,000 to walk 22 miles. Not everybody walked it, but it was kind of a relay pilgrimage, I guess you could say. I was at the beginning and the end and every stop along the way. We were carrying olive branches, and I bought an olive tree. A friend of mine bought an olive tree, Jesse, who also traveled to Palestine with me for one of the delegations. And we offered that also to the masjid, to the mosque. And everyone felt in the midst of tremendous grief that at least there was this place they could go and feel the possibility of everyone wanting an end to militarism, wanting an end to militarism as a solution. And in the encampments, it's very much the same way. Divestment and seeing that students are, that at least there's this movement toward divestment, because we know that and campaigns to stop renewing Israeli bonds. Israeli bonds are kind of like a slush fund that Israel has, and so there's a campaign that is to stop investing in Israeli bonds. So, and then what gives me, I wouldn't call it hope, but energy to keep on keeping on. First of all, I couldn't do it otherwise. It's just not in my nature not to try to do everything that's humanly possible. But in this moment, we see there's an intifada, a global intifada, which intifada means to shake something off, like a dog shaking off water or something. And it's an uprising. It's a stir. It's the last intifada to get rid of colonialism. It's the last in that Palestine is still occupied. And whenever people ask me that, I have to be very circumspect about it, because there are millions of families who are experiencing the worst losses and hopelessness and desperation in their lives. And literally, some people are scrawling on the walls of, like one wall that remains of a house, "Thank you, Jewish community voices, for standing with." I mean, there is no choice, really. If you want to be a human being in a place where there are no human beings, you have to try to be a human being. That's, you have to strive to be a mensch. I mean, that's not really about hope. It's about trying to be human. Just try to be a human being and to heal what we can in our own lives to be able to carry on. And for me, that's painting, it's art, it's people I love, it's learning, it's nature, it's meditation, it's so many different things. It's not one thing, but that's self-tending and communal tending while we struggle on.
Thank you, Rabbi Lynn. This is such a rich conversation, and it lands in my heart. Thank you.
We want to start with the question. Itang, I hope I'll say your name properly.
It's Ethan, but no worries.
Oh, okay. Ethan.
Yeah, no stress. So yeah, thank you for your time, Rabbi Gottlieb. I really appreciate it. I was wondering, and not sure if I worded this great, but
don't worry about it.
I really appreciated your use of the term ideological package. I think that's actually like a perfect statement for what we're experiencing right now in regards to modern Zionism. I'm wondering, is there a way, as you said, like these conversations frequently become entrenched, and I personally believe it has a lot to do with the fact that you're frequently also not speaking to a person, but to their intergenerational trauma and conception of what that trauma has done to them, their family, and what safety has to mean for them now. And this is obviously all through the lens now of modern Zionism, which is a grossly violent settler colonial enterprise. I'm wondering, as people who have begun to deconstruct it, both historically, spiritually, philosophically, how we can maybe begin to meet these people whose emotional reality is, of course, valid, and whose lived experiences in Zionist spaces like Hebrew school, birthright, camp, what have you, they've had that were positive. And also with our understanding that it is a settler colonial movement to its core, from Herzl's words about the need to move the Palestinians, from Balfour's A Land with No People, from Ben-Gurion, being a labor Zionist and being prepared for the same iron wall that Jabotinsky wanted. I'm really struggling in just to come up with how to say, this is the history. As you said, it is a genocide. There are military documents about how the Nakba was performed that are accessible to all of us. And how do we take that step to say, you can look, you can see, but as you said, it becomes so entrenched because there's not even the want to go take a look per se, because the ideological package has done the work for them and their trauma has solidified it.
Thank you. We want to keep the question short because we have many people that would like to engage. Thank you, Ethan. Yeah.
A lot of people are weaponizing the trauma, which they're not necessarily people who have experienced a trauma directly, or even second generation. I tend to work with people who have directly experienced it. As far as a conversation that you might have with a human being, another human being, how you conduct that conversation with sensitivity that keeps the identity, both of your humanities in the forefront, that's a good thing. Unlearning racism, unlearning sexism, unlearning modalities of thinking that we've been schooled on our entire lives takes some work. And so we kind of have to start with ourselves and keep working on ourselves in that regard, and centering people who are directly impacted, directly traumatized. That's my very short answer. And offer context, healing context. Like in the encampments, when I lead Sabbath services, lots of people show up who aren't Jewish, and it's a happy place for people. It's multilingual, Ladino, Arabic, Jewish. There's some music. It's this kind of a somber time, poetry, sharing, creating ceremony that is inclusive, invitational, lives with messiness is a source of resiliency for people who need resiliency in order to struggle. And that's really where my focus is. And it is true that the Bible is very violent. There's no doubt about it. I mean, lots of times, kids who grew up in my congregation in Albuquerque, there's a lot of times kids will, they grew up in my congregation. There were peace walks. It was a very playful place. Play is a very healing modality for people. And then they actually read some of the Bible, and they're like, Rabbi Lynn, who wrote that? It's like, what is that? For instance, capital punishment. What do you prefer? Stoning, burning? It's not, but we are not biblical Jews. We are rabbinic Jews. The Jewish tradition has evolved. And part of Zionism is to go back to some of the biblical pieces that are the most violent, and to use those verses and that weaponization of the conquest tradition is exactly what Ben Gurion did. He lifted up the Joshua tradition of conquest and kind of made that the thing, but it's a very narrow reading even of that tradition. So one has to kind of be narrow-minded, narrow one's focus to be in denialism, to rule out the conflicting voices. But I would never be an apologist. I just say, I choose the Torah of nonviolence. This is a Torah that I choose, and I try to live by it, and to unpack certain ways of thinking that are very problematic. Yeah. Good luck.
Thank you. Yemi.
Yemi Pen. See if I mispronounced the second name in a row.
You got it perfectly. Yemi Pen. We'll accept that. Thank you so much for creating the space, and thank you, Lynn. My question, which I say with a beating heart for fear I'll get it wrong, but I know it's a safe space. History leaves so much clues, so many clues. And when I hear this, I can just think, oh, that feels like that happened to this culture. That feels like this happened to this group. And surely there's wisdom in it. And I find, as a Black woman who I struggle to accept identities, but for where we are in the world right now, you kind of have no choice, is how do we reach other cultures who feel that they may have experienced something different under a different guise, but felt the world did not listen or lean in? Because that's where I'm an engineer by profession, but now I'm doing research on transformation of cultural trauma. That's no coincidence. My desire is for humanity, for us to be sustainable, but I can't help but feel somatically, anciently, that there's something in other cultures that may have felt they got left alone, and therefore they can't seem to step in and support causes like this. I'm really keen, and I'm not looking for answers, but any insight or wisdom that you could give.
That's very true. In the early days of my advocacy, because I've worked on racial justice in the U.S., my son's ended up being a public defender, and is horrified at the justice system here. And it's very true that communities can be extremely overwhelmed with what's happening to them, and don't feel like they have time to devote to another whole group of people. I can appreciate that. What is perhaps different about this moment is a broader realization that we have to struggle together. And those who are able to struggle together and see the struggle not as taking away, but as contributing to the struggle for justice that is impacting lots of different communities. The weaponization of this struggle, my friend Jeff Halper called it the Palestinization of the United States. So police are taken to Israel to train on how to deal with crowds. So you see right now with the encampments, chemical spray and skunk water, and just the way that militarism has impacted the police from the days of Vietnam, and is continuing to grow now with AI and all of that. This is global, and therefore those of us who are able to both serve our communities in the way they need to be served, and to broaden the struggle so that we can struggle collectively. This is critical, and I see it happening more in this moment than I've ever seen it. The labor union knows about this. The labor union knows, right?
Yeah.
And taking that model, also, again, centering the voices of those who are directly impacted and not trying to impose a solution. In any of all the peace talks, Palestinians have never been a voice in that talk. They were always sidelined in Oslo, for instance. So we're asking now for a different model that can lift everybody up and to dismantle, dissolve the structures of harm, especially those that have decimated Black communities in the United States for centuries. And that's why 900 Black pastors spoke, create a peace walk and are speaking out for Palestine, because the understanding is growing that the militarism and the corporate culpability, the weapons manufacturers, this is local and global both.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's local and global both. So we have to keep our eye on how things reverberate, and also not to ask communities that are struggling for survival to explain everything to us. You know what I mean? So we have learned some about anti-racist work for people who are not Black, what that looks like, and what it means actually to come into solidarity as opposed to charity. There are lessons we can learn, and it is truly a humble pathway, I feel like, for myself. But I always come hoping to learn something, and not to make
to do it together.
Not to make things worse for people that are already trying to hold up in life in impossible conditions.
Thank you. I continue to believe in her.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie.
There are two questions that we would like to read.
I want to read this one from Caroline Tabak. When I think about my own Jewish identity as the child of Holocaust survivors, on the one hand, I don't see that Israel represents me, but on the other, I have a deep shame for the action of the one and only Jewish country in the world towards the Palestinians. In my own psyche, I clearly also conflate my Judaism with Israel. How to reconcile this inner split?
Israel is not exclusively a Jewish country. That's the first thing.
That's beautiful.
It's not. If one says that by definition, one is denying the presence of Palestinians. And now Filipinos and other people who, there is no place on earth anymore that is exclusively one kind of ethnicity. That's such a problematic idea. There are a lot of Jewish people who live in Israel. Israel is a state where 6 million Jewish people live, and so do 6 million Palestinians. So we need safety for everybody. For Jewish people to be safe, Palestinians have to be safe. For Palestinians to be safe, Jewish people have to be safe. Everybody has to be safe so they can live out their Jewish lives or their Palestinian lives in whatever way they want to, that lifts them up. Their culture, tradition, histories, none of that should be erased. But people have to feel safe wherever they live, wherever anybody lives. So it is confusing to think of Jewish people as an ethnicity, because we're not actually. There are ethnic groups within our community. my friend Rachel likes to say, I'm 100% Ashkenazi. She did one of those DNA tests. It's like, I'm 100% okay. That means that her family's been living in a certain place for a long time, and there's cultural wisdom and all of these things. How we carry those forward is a really important question. There's a lot of Middle Eastern Jews. The history of Israel has kind of erased that history as well. There's Syrian, I've spoken to many Sephardi and Middle Eastern Jews who feel erased by Ashkenazi history and Ashkenazi normativity in assuming that Judaism looks a certain way. So Jewish people have work to do in recognizing our own diversity and creating safe spaces across our differences and our diversities, gender, race, ethnic, religious attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors, as does every people. Statehood should preserve those rights. Who's ever living there.
Amen.
People want to take off on Shabbat. They should, I would love that idea. Even New York lifts up alternate sides of the street parking on the high holidays. I mean, there's lots of ways to support majority communities in a larger context.
Yeah. I remember being in the West Bank, occupied West Bank, and some of the Palestinian people we met, they were like, if you do our DNA test, we are way more Jewish than the settlers on the other side of the hill. There's no...
Yeah.
I try not to wade into those waters. I don't want to wade into those waters, but but yes, denying Palestinians their own history on the land is what the Zionist project was about.
Yeah. Dina Wake. Let's bring Dina on.
You can unmute yourself. Yeah, there you go.
Oh, yes. Somebody asked me about impunity too, and I will come back to that. Yeah. Hi.
Hi. I actually know Rabbi Lynn from Toronto and her time with the Danforth Jewish Circle, so it's nice to see you again.
See you too.
I have to say that I'm disappointed that that this time was not used in a way not to reiterate why the occupation is a bad thing, because I know it, and I would contend, though I don't speak for the 310 other people on this call, that we all know it. I was coming, and so I'm talking for me. I am disappointed that the name of this was the Jewish identity after October 7th. I'm both Israeli as well as Jewish. And for me, as somebody who has been anti-occupation all my adult life, who has been part of the left wing in Israel all my adult life, both in Israel and outside of Israel, I need a framework. I need a venue. I and those like me need a place to be able to relocate ourselves, certainly external to the world, and how every Israeli is vilified. Every Jew, that walks into the encampment has to be an anti-Zionist or else they're not allowed in. So that's not diversity for me, because Zionism is also, I believe, a contentious-ish term that may need a little bit of unpacking, or let's just say there are many ways to be Zionist, the same ways there are many ways to be anti-Zionist. These are my thoughts. But the thing is that as a Jew and as a left-wing Jew and as a left-wing Israeli, I was hoping to have space here where Rabbi Lynn might speak to us, not to reiterate why the occupation is a bad thing. I know that. I truly know that. I've known it since the 80s. What I want is to be able to have a space where I can unpack my identity, my Jewish identity, my Israeli identity in a way that's safe, and without having to be once again lectured to about why the occupation is a bad thing, because I know it. So when we're so I just want to express, not, I agree with everything Lynn's saying. There's no contention here. What is contentious for me is that I was hoping there would be a space here for me, not to talk about is the occupation bad or not, because I know it isn't, but to deal with me as a Jew and as an Israeli grappling with the destruction of my soul, of my Jewish space, of my Israeli space. I'm an Israeli. I'm not going to go away. I have to contend with how that feels, and how that feels now, and how that feels since I grew into majority. So I'm just sorry that we didn't spend more time there.
We have time.
Let's stay. We have
Let's stay. We have
Let's
time.
address that.
we have 7 minutes. We have
I
7
know,
We can
minutes.
stay longer. Let's do it. Let's use those 7 minutes.
Support you in
So
that.
Lynn, so thank you, Zaya and Maurizio. So Lynn, talk to me about being a Jew, a proud Jew, an ethnic Jew, because I do see it as ethnically, that's my ethnicity, because, and so I claim that, and that's okay. I claim my Israeli identity. My parents arrived in Israel because they were Zionists. I now am grappling with that. So I'm doing my work. Help me to do my work in that space, because I thought this space was going to be that. I certainly don't need to be to have the occupation argued with. Thank you for that.
Understanding. I didn't actually speak a lot about the occupation. I did not unpack the occupation. But as a Jewish person, our identities have definitely crashed, I feel, since October 7th. So what has crashed? What has crashed is a long history of denialism about what is happening. And this is how I see it. So this is how I'm speaking. And the idea of a kind of impunity that people have, that the uncomfortableness and the discomfort of having one's deep beliefs about how things how the structure of Israeliness has arisen and what it has meant, to me, is traumatic. I actually don't feel like my Jewish identity has ever really been interrupted, because I'm a knowledgeable Jewish person. I feel mostly good in the Jewish communities where I feel comfortable and welcome. The celebrations are available to me. The libraries are available to me. The universities are available to me. The hospitals are available to me. Walking on the street is pretty available to me. Most spaces are available to me, and I feel fairly welcome. And where I don't feel welcome is around trying to address the massive systemic harm that other people are experiencing on our behalf. So for me, what it means to address identity after October 7th is to reframe one's life, to examine one's solidarity. This is something I think those people who have white people who have worked on racism are very familiar with. People who've worked on sexism are very familiar with. We understand how certain attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors are being challenged by people who carry the burden of harm. So this is an uncomfortable space, and sometimes it means maybe you were expecting this to be a Jewish-only space. I don't know if it is or not, but for Jewish people who are here, there are, of course, very different needs about trying to remain and figure out what it means to be Jewish when your own people are committing genocide. It's just overwhelming. And whatever past histories and however we may have acted, something did not stop this. This happened, and it did not happen out of the blue. And so we are being challenged to, why did that happen? Why did this arise? Let's unpack this, because there was a people driving this truck were not stopped, and no matter how hard some of us may have tried to interrupt that, and by creating spaces of Jewish Palestinian coexistence, by building playgrounds, by trying to stop the Nakba law from coming into place, by challenging militarism, by so many different ways, we were not able to. And then on the emotional level, everyone that I know is devastated, and trying to live with that devastation. For me, I've always done that through solidarity. I've tried to do that through solidarity. And then in those solidarity relationships, I can speak to the 1,000 wooden synagogues of magnificent interiors and beautiful exteriors that were completely destroyed during the Holocaust, and what it means to me to focus my own artwork on retrieving. And so I think part of the work of Jewish retrieval and finding ways to bring that into contemporary context, that's part of the emotional work of teaching people how to dance klezmer. I mean, which my community knows how to. There's so many ways to resource resiliency, but we have absolutely failed to stop the impunity that has allowed this, and that just is heart-shattering. And I look for the images in Midrash, the shattering of these tablets and standing there with shards. And one image I have is when I went to Shiraz on a peace delegation, we went into the Mosque of Mirrors, and it was completely constructed with tiny pieces of mirror. And it really made me think of the story of the Conference of the Birds, of all the birds traveling together to try to meet the Shekhinah, if you like, meet the presence whose feather dropped in the east, and many fall away, and in the fog or in the desert or in more beautiful places. And those who arrive see that the inner chamber appears to be empty, and they faint. And when they awake, they see their images merge into the great Shekhinah, that the great Shekhinah, and this is a Jewish idea too, is woven from all of us. And I keep that idea of a thread that goes from me to other people and is weaving us in this beautiful tapestry of humanity that's mirrored, is miraculous, that comes into being. That's a kind of spiritual dimension that I hold. And to speak of harm is not to shame people. It is to testify, because tshuva, the process of reconciliation and repair, it has 5 stages. Awareness of the harm. That's an emotionally shattering moment. Hakarat hachet, understanding one's own place in the harm. Vidui, giving public witness to the harm. Pe'era, paying it back. Reparations. And azivat hachet, guarantees of non-repeat. So this is perhaps a framework. This is a framework which helps me figure out where any given community is. And I have to say, and you probably know this from your time in Israel, it's my experience when I travel there, that it's a very small minority and getting smaller every day, who's even at the hakara level, even at, oh, this is happening. And when they see it happening, it is their fault. And I need spaces to grieve that. I need spaces to come together and to grieve it and to cry it and to be with people who do understand it, and then to shift to, well, what can we do? What can we do now? And that conversation is in a solidarity framework. And it is not easy to have a, say, more religious, or maybe a more, a pre-1948 idea of Zionism, or even the idea that Zionism and Jewish people could have safe haven in Israel, and to witness what that has produced. Actually, this is, yes, it's traumatic. I'm so sorry. I am just so sorry. Really, I'm so sorry for all of our losses, and for the shattering, that comes with that loss. And I hope, even in spaces that are uncomfortable, that we can still struggle for an end to the militarism that has plagued our community. This belief in militarism as the new Jew, and kind of show why that's such a terrible idea, and to invite Palestinians into our spaces. It is still, in the United States, almost never do you ever see, and I've been trying for years to even have conversations that may be very, very messy and contentious. They just don't happen. So maybe, I'm so sorry. I apologize to all of us, but I feel driven to try to stop this genocide. That's like my main priority right now, is just to stop it. Stop it. So that is my Jewish identity after October 7th, actually, is using all the wisdom and all my experiences, my love of people, my love of my own tradition, to try to stop this violent machine, which has destroyed an unfathomable amount of life. Thank you, Dina.
Dina.
Thank you,
Thank you
Dina.
so
Thank
much
you.
for bringing your question, your grief, your grappling with this is the work of this time. Thank you for doing that.
Thank you. So
Thank you, Rabbi Lynn. We're way past our time, but this is well worth it to expand and go beyond. And this deserves so much more time. And I agree, this space we just scratched the surface of, it's vast. As we draw to a close, Rabbi Lynn, is there one action that you can call this community to take to stop towards stopping this violence, this machine of violence, this genocide? And it might
be part of the encampment of life. Be part of the encampment of life. And whatever is appropriate in your own region, because different places around the world are responding differently, be part of that and find there's so many things happening all over the world. Be part of that. And within that, you will find a way.
participate. Yeah, be part of it.
raise your voice.
Use your voice, raise your voice.
Raise your voice.
Share your grief. Yeah.
Before we go, though, we would like, if anybody had to go, Lynn, if you have to go, please. We want to share something with you that nobody has yet seen. In May 2022, we went with Zaya to film a movie in the occupied territory of Palestine and the West Bank. And the movie will come out June 6th to the 27th as a world premiere. The trailer, we're going to show you the trailer here. Nobody has seen it. It's very private. We cannot yet release it until Tuesday for complicated reasons. If you have 2 minutes,
before we show the trailer, Rabbi Lynn, thank you so much for being with us, for sharing your wisdom, your heart, and you have so much to offer and teach us. So I bow to you.
Yeah.
And I bow to you too. We all bow to each other.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Yeah, thank you.
For joining and being here in this space. It's painful, it's uncomfortable, but let's continue meeting and being together in this. Yeah. That's the only way.
The encampment of life.
The encampment of
life.
The encampment
of life.
The encampment of life is a refusal to accept impunity for violence.
Beautiful. Yes.
So let us all live under that banner.
Yeah.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. And the trailer is just 2.5 minutes. If you want to stay and enjoy it, and we'll be sharing the film.
And you're the first in the world.
Sarah, if you can share the screen, thank you.
I heard the stories of the pains of how people were tortured in these places. I never believed it until I saw. And when I saw, I couldn't unsee it.
It's so important for people to understand colonization in order to understand what's happening in the world. And here in Palestine, it's happening now.
So how does the world completely turns a blind eye to the Israeli continuous violence and sees Israel as the victim? This is the big question.
I would
would see it and still get surprised every single time that how could this soldier just shoot me? We're so dehumanized to the point where they can come and they can exterminate you because to them, you're nothing but a rat.
I'm not pro-Palestinian, but I'm pro-truth. And the truth is, the Palestinians have been oppressed and suppressed and murdered and controlled and dispossessed for decades. That's just the truth. There's no post-traumatic stress disorder here because the trauma is never post.
فلتتجلى فيك روحي فلتتجلى فيك سمائي فلتتجلى يا إلهي فلتتجلى فلتتجلى فلتتجلى.
Your brother and your sister being in chains will not make this experience on earth acceptable. Your chains will be still held by my chains. And unless I am free, you won't be free.
So we will be releasing the film in June 6th. It will be
June 6th.
available online, so anyone can see it from June 6th to the 27th.
So you'll receive email of it since you are in our emailing list, and yeah.
And please share it with whoever.
Not yet.
Yeah,
'Cause
not yet.
There is
not
no link yet.
yes,
You will not
but
find it anywhere.
Share it and announce.
From Tuesday, you can announce it and share it.
And before we leave, next week, we have a very special conversation with Angela Davis and Gabor Mate. So that's going to be on May 17th. We'll be announcing it shortly. So it's coming up very soon. But I hope you come back and we will continue our conversation together.
Yes. So thank you,
again,
thank you,
everyone.
thank you, thank you, thank you, each and every one of you. It's a joy and an honor to share space with you.
And
Thank you.
participate in the encampment of life.
The encampment of life.